The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the Nova Society are those of our guests and panel members and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution any member of the Nova Society is associated with. The material information presented on the Nova Society is for general information purposes only. Reproduction or dissemination for the purpose other than education is prohibited without express written consent of the Nova Society. We'd like to welcome everyone back to the Nova Society, and today, once again, we reach into our mailbag and our panel will try to answer a question from one of our listeners. And the question is, recently, the United States Congress, controlled by Republicans, rejected a potential deal to secure the southern border of the United States. Does our panel believe that this will hurt the Republicans in the coming elections? And what might this mean for immigration to the United States going forward? So let's listen in. All right, so the next question we got, again, now this one was from Bosnia, which our dear friend and colleague, Alexandra Nisic, is from. Dr. Nisic is from there. And this is about the border. And it said, the border deal was recently rejected by Republicans. Do we think that that will hurt Republicans in the general election? And here's a question that probably is directed directly to Priscilla. What do the younger generation think of the border crisis? Do they think it's real or do they think it's made up?
Well, I think the argument is real, but it's all superficial malarkey at the end of the day. It's people trying to, piss on trees and puff up their chests for power. I don't see any value at all in the conversation around the border. And the folks that, raise the concerns for the border, on one hand, yes, there is the genuine fear of the crime that's happening at the border. A wall's not going to prevent the crime. There is concerns about the migrants and the quote unquote border jumpers coming over and taking our jobs. And it's like, it's a bit more complex than that, honey. And then just the whole, we need to protect well, you know what? We don't need to protect one part of our country if we're not going to protect the other part of our country. So why are we spending so much time trying to protect ourselves from the brown countries and not from the white countries to our north? I have a hard time believing that it really is just about border protection.
When you talk about the white countries to our north, there really is only Canada.
Oh, yeah,
It's okay to say Canada. Scott, what do you think? What do you think it's going to mean to the Republicans going forward? They promised they wanted this, they got what they wanted, and now they don't want it. Do you think it's going to hurt them?
No, well, it's going to hurt them if they follow through with this plan that they have to not do anything on the border until Donald Trump is president again. Because you can't scream about something being a crisis and an invasion and then go, well, let's wait a year before we fix that. Just doesn't make any sense. So I think that something will get done. I don't think I don't think Speaker Johnson will be the one who engineers it, but I think that there will be something within the next couple of weeks that will break this issue, fund Ukraine, get the support that you need for the border, get the judges that you need to hear the cases, get the law changed so that asylum is different than it is right now, quicker process, easier to adjudicate, and with the people that you need to adjudicate it, and that these crises will be over long before the election.
Well, I mean, you teach, face to face still. Does the younger generation that you teach see this as an actual crisis, or do they see it as made up?
We try not to talk a lot of this
we try not to talk politics.
In class, I teach communications, not civics. So, or some of the other subjects that this might come up naturally in. But I don't get the sense that my face-to-face students know much about what's going on beyond pretty much their arm length. And it goes back almost as far as when they were about 5 years old, before it's ancient history and they don't care about it and doesn't matter anymore. So I'm not thinking that the young people are gonna know too much about these things. Now, a lot of the students that I teach are immigrants. Danbury, where I teach, has a large Brazilian population, but most of the Brazilians fly here and simply don't leave when their visas or whatever says that they have to leave, and they, find themselves part of the community. So, hopefully that answers your question. I don't think
Well, it does.
I don't think young people care about anything anymore, other than TikTok videos and things like that.
Well, and I would agree. Even on the online environment, I had a student, and I do get stuck with these more politically charged courses. Who was in Vermont and wrote a paper about the border crisis, and this student, I'm assuming, because I did have a open office hours with her, I'm going to assume she's about 28 years old, very, very intelligent, and she lives in Vermont. And she was extremely concerned of the border crisis as it relates to her. And all I'm thinking of is, you're on the other side of the country. I mean, exactly what is it that you're afraid of from the people coming across the southern border? I mean, I could see if you lived in, I don't know, Southern California, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. Okay, I get it. I could even say, all right, if you were in Utah and Oklahoma and just a little bit of Nevada, okay, I could see it. But Vermont, I mean, we're talking.
You can't forget that Vermont, as with most of New England, has an opiate problem. And so, the thing.
Well, I hope that wasn't the contributing factor.
Well, no, but if you're thinking about like why somebody up in the corner of New England would care about the border when you're coming from a narrative where an open border equals drug cartels, and you're in a community where you're already worried about drugs, it doesn't really quite matter where those drugs are sourced. It's like jumping over a few leaps of logic to get to the fact that border equals drugs, backyard has drug problem, therefore I need to be worried about the border.
Do you see that the way young people look at it, Priscilla?
Well, I think the way it depends.
Do young people look at it differently than
define
say,
young people?
All
like
right,
if you're saying me, young person, versus people younger than me.
Well, all right. Let me define. I'm sure that myself, Scott, and Brooke are of about the same age. And I will first be the first one to say I am the oldest, and Brooklyn is the youngest. But yeah, you're of an age of my oldest daughter, and so I look at you as one of as a young person compared to like us old people. But I mean, you're not my grandchildren.
Mm-mm.
I mean, so you have that middle perspective that maybe we had 25 years ago. You see what I'm saying? I mean, that's kind of the way I look at this.
I mean, it's a generation difference.
It's a
Yeah.
generational thing. And that's, I guess, the question. I'm not actually, probably not in matter of age, but the generation. Like you say, millennials, do millennials look at this different?
I mean, most of the millennials that I interface with see it as incredibly stupid, so the folks who come out of what I would call maybe a South Park generation, because South Park had a whole long arc in their show about the quote unquote crisis, and really satirically making fun of the people who like were afraid they're going to take our jobs. Like they had a whole thing about this. So people who are coming out of that South Park generation, I think, are more inclined to see it as, something that's a bit more of a political maneuver and not as anything that's a real social concern. The Gen Z folks, I don't see a lot about the border coming across like TikTok or YouTube, and I have a lot of like political feeds, so my algorithm is very, very political. So the stuff that I see that comes across is things where they like show the person who walks up to the wall and basically shows how you can walk around it. It's like highlighting the fact that we have this wall and it's pretty stupid.
Yeah.
It's pretty. I know it's like my word of the day. I'm sorry, but like what we wanted was a Great Wall of China, and what we got instead was, a screen door. And so it's like, there's nothing there, but I do think there's a little bit of where there's a little bit of the balance, that's like the other folks who might see a bit more of the crisis, comes from like shows like Breaking Bad or Narcos, like those really incredibly popular shows that help to kind of resurface some of the drug fears that for a number of years have actually been like part of the cultural narrative that have ebbed away and then they've come back again. But at the same time, a lot of those drug fears are also like, we don't necessarily have the same concerns over the crack epidemic. LSD and other psychedelics are on the rise again, and everyone's legalizing pot. So it's like the whole drug narrative really doesn't mean much. And then the whole like bust over whoever it was, the big opioid company that just had their big giant bust, really helped reinforce the corporate, anti-corporate attitudes towards big pharma.
Mm-hmm. Brooklyn, is it reality? Is it going to hurt the Republicans for not signing up for this? And do you think that younger people that you interact with see this as like a big deal?
Well, it depends on the younger person. And like Priscilla, I was thinking, define younger, because everybody seems, well, not everybody, but to me, lately, nearly everybody seems to be younger than I. And I'm thinking, how old am I again? And oh no. Anyway, it depends on the person. And even though we're here in New York, some people get very excited and I think overexcited about it. To me, it's obviously political machination and flying people or busing people all over the place who cross the border. It's all political. Whether especially since, as I understand it, the Biden policy is approximately the same as the Trump policy, and Obama and Biden have stopped and deported and arrested and removed more people than Trump ever did. According to the numbers, I have not looked at the numbers, but this is what I have understood from news reporting. So again, it's all bluster, and as Scott said, you can't say, "Oh, this is such a huge crisis," and then you get everything you want in a bill, and then say, "Oh, no, that's not really what we wanted," and having Trump say, "This is great. This is we killed the bill. It was a Biden bill. It was terrible. It was this. It was that." But it was what the Republicans had asked for, and now nothing has happened. And I wish I could be optimistic like Scott. I mean, and unless something has changed, we're looking at a partial government shutdown, day after tomorrow or something. I am not sure if anything much is, well, nothing is going to hurt the Trump diehardists. And I'm not sure about the swing state people. There seem to be very much I mean, Biden's numbers to me are not what they should be given what he has done. And again, I know that polls this far out are not reliable, but apparently a Harvard poll again now shows Trump ahead, including in states that Biden won, like some of the swing states. And I find that very concerning. I would love to feel that the American voters who are not inculcated and mentally drawn into this cult cannot possibly be willing to vote for Trump a second time, knowing what he is saying and doing, and that if both men are cognitively compromised, that they would choose the one who will surround himself and has surrounded himself with people who are not cognitively impaired and who do know what they're doing, rather than someone who has already surrounded himself with people who very much have demonstrated that they do not know what they're doing and they do not care if they hurt the American public and if they damage the country or not. I mean, I would think that the choice would be eminently clear which of the two candidates would be the better of the two, given age and potential cognitive decline. Or, I mean, I wish that I felt confident that this border issue would hurt Republicans. I'm hopeful that the abortion issue is going to hurt Republicans. I'm hopeful that something will hurt Republicans enough to march people who even if they're not enthusiastic about Biden, will march people to the polls and make sure that Trump is not elected. Whatever the issue is, I don't care. But no, the border is simply made up, and Abbott's refusal to Governor Abbott's refusal to cooperate with the federal government is obviously it just makes him look bad, in my opinion. I mean, the other Republican governors may think he's great, but he's jerking the people there around and making life much more difficult for the people whom he's supposed to be serving, and I think it's contemptible.
Yeah, and so, I'm gonna just really quickly jump in on a real quick take onto this. Two stories that came up maybe seem unrelated. It's shootings at universities. On February 16th, there was a shooting at the University of Colorado where there was a fatality. Just last Thursday, University of Georgia, there was a young lady, nursing student, found murdered. The Colorado Springs College murder was from somebody that was from the United States, actually from Detroit. At least he's been accused. The University of Georgia murder was by an undocumented immigrant. You've probably heard far more about the Georgia murder than you have about the Colorado Springs murder, because this became political fodder. And matter of fact, it became such political fodder that New York City has started to roll back its sanctuary city status. And that's because, by what I can understand, the mayor of New York City, two of his daughters go to the University of Georgia, and they are upset. So this seems to me, again, probably everyone in the nation has heard about the University of Georgia because it was an illegal immigrant that committed the act. But the one in Colorado, basically some kid from Detroit, and didn't seem to take up that much space on CNN or any of the other networks. So I see this as something that's politically motivated, especially when you look at that kind of situation. Both murders are tragedies. One is not worse. Simply because it was committed by an illegal immigrant. And if you look at the statistics, illegal immigrants have less crime than actual Native American citizens. So you're going to say, Scott?
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting point, and I totally agree with you. It's political. And so let's talk a little bit about the politics of it. And, Texas is by far the largest border with Mexico, followed by, I believe, Arizona, New Mexico, then California. And I may not have that in the right order, but let's say Texas has by far the largest border. It is a huge issue in Texas. It is not as huge an issue in those other states. Why? Let's look at the numbers. In 2012, Texas presidential year, just going to do presidential years. Republicans won Texas by plus 16 points. In 2016, Republicans won Texas by plus 9 points. In 2020, Republicans won Texas by plus 5 points. That is a trend line. By 2030, Texas could be a blue state. And by 2050, Texas is going to be bigger than New York State and California combined. And it's going to be a Democratic stronghold. That is what the politics of this are. And that is why Republicans in Texas are making such a big deal about it, and why Republicans in general are screaming so much about the border. It is 100% about politics. They believe that this is being done on purpose. They seem to believe, or if they don't actually believe, that there's a movement to flood the United States with immigrants who will eventually, I suppose, because I think actually they think that they have the vote right away, but eventually, if they become citizens, will vote Democratic, and this is going to destroy the Republican Party. Now, you mentioned New York, right? New York is a city of, I think, 8 million people right now. After 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, 30,000 Ukrainian refugees came to New York. None of them, or I shouldn't say none, very few of them ended up in any kind of shelters. But once immigrants began to be shipped out of Texas up to New York, the same amount of immigrants so far in that period, the city has had to open 200 emergency shelters and is now opening hotels up to them, to immigrants, and so on and so forth. I believe the number is like 37,800 immigrants have been shipped from Texas to New York, and it has seemed to have caused some kind of incredible crisis in New York, where they can't house these people, they can't assimilate them in, and that is the basis of the problem. But it really shouldn't be that difficult for us to deal with the numbers of immigrants that are coming in, especially when we consider that only 3% of asylum seekers get asylum, and the rest of them are shipped back to the countries of origin. And it just seems to me that this is a manufactured crisis that is being manipulated by the Republicans, especially those in Texas, to create some kind of discontent. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't secure the border. Absolutely, you have to secure the border. You can't have chaos. You can't have a country with no borders, and you can't have chaos down there. But what I see when I look at the pictures, the recent video and things at the border, is not chaos. What I see is people lined up waiting to speak to agents. It's not like it was back in the 80s when people were running across and trying to escape the agents. Even the ones that you see who are swimming across the Rio Grande are coming to this side and looking for an agent to surrender to, so that they could begin the process of being asylum seekers. And until you change the law for asylum seeking, you're not going to resolve this crisis. Certainly, you don't want any of the deterrence that Trump tried with family separation and things like that. Is cruel and inhuman to do that. You don't want to do nothing, but there are solutions to this issue. There is a huge backlog. That backlog was there of because Donald Trump, didn't want anybody coming into this country, and really closed off legal immigration more than he did illegal immigration. And I'll finish this diatribe with a question. Republicans like to claim that Biden is responsible for this because Biden campaigned on the issue of being more humane at the border. And that message got out there to Central America and other places that we were going to be more humane. We weren't going to separate families. And if you could come to the border, if you can get here, you were going to get in. Does it not seem possible, if that's the case, if this is a word of mouth going out to the immigrant hungry world out there, that the Republicans constantly saying the border is open, the border is open, the border is open, is not sending a message that people are hearing that they could come here and find the border open? Maybe Republicans should just shut up about the border being open and not advertise that. And that might alleviate some of the problems that we have there. As I said, I believe last week, the immigrants are coming now from other places, not necessarily Central America. We've seen El Salvador cutting off a lot of immigration. We know that there's a plan in place for Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala. That plan is being expanded. I believe it was something like, I forget what the number is, 6 million calls to that hotline number for immigrants to make appointments. So there's less chaos now at the border and more people showing up with appointments to speak about asylum, whether they end up getting it or not, and a lot less of a crisis that we have had than we have had before.
Yeah, like many of the issues that we see, it's manufactured and from the perspective of which we're looking at it. Like I said, the idea that 2 murders have happened within the last 10, 12 days at 2 universities, and one was committed by an American, and one was committed by a illegal immigrant, and that the illegal immigrant murder is the one that's getting the front page news simply because of the illegal immigrant status. And now they're even saying that he was stopped in New York City and the New York City police had released him. Of course, more news will come out on that as New York is actually pushing back on that kind of statement. Because again, they're saying, well, you had him, and you didn't do anything with him. And because you're a sanctuary city, you let him go. And that really isn't. That's the narrative that's being put out there, but that's not really the case. And of course, more news will come out about that. I mean, if you're going to make it across the board, I guess nobody from Detroit can come to college anymore because we're going to stop people from Detroit, which is where this young man was from, that's been accused of the murder in Colorado. Just as much as we would stop the illegal immigrants. So you can't have it. You cannot have it both ways. And I think we look for it to be both ways. I think that the Congress not dealing with this, it gives them, it causes an issue for them because they have been screaming about it for now 4 years. Actually, they've been screaming about it for quite a long time. This is not something, and I heard the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, say, well, I believe that the president can, with executive orders, do this right here and now. These are the same people that say that the president overextends his use of executive orders. So again, you can't have it both ways. I can say that, and I'm going to go to my children's age, they don't really care about this. This is not a thing to them. again, one lives in California. We've got 3 up in New York, and 1 overseas. But I mean, and 1 here in South Carolina. Gosh, it's hard to keep track of all of them. But I mean, they just don't see it as impacting their everyday life. And what the Republicans have attempted to do was, over the past set of years, made it seem like this crisis impacts your everyday life. And we were presented with something that was agreed up by partisanship in the Senate. And we gave it to the House, and the House, because Donald Trump said no, said no. Now what's your argument? Now, granted, this is not going to speak very much to too many people that are on the Trump train, who have drank the Kool-Aid, who are in the cult. This is not going to speak to them. But I think to those moderate Republicans, I think they're kind of looking at this saying, wait a minute. You had an opportunity to have one of the most comprehensive border packages put across. And at the same time, I think most Republicans support Ukraine. We need to support Ukraine. I think they're behind that. Most of the moderate and even a little farther of the right Republicans. Heck, some of the really far right Republicans are. We need to support Ukraine. So this was all part of it. And because one person who isn't even in office said, no, I don't like this. I don't want you to do it because I want to, do something when I get there. And this is, of course, a guy who said he wanted to do a lot of things when he got into office and didn't do a whole heck of a lot of anything. I want you to kick the can down the road until after November and then do something. So I think it's manufactured. I think it's been manufactured for political reasons, which I guess we've all said. And at the same time, I think it's something that's going to come back and is going to hurt the Republicans. So that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of the Phoenix Research Institute. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Science. The JCIS is an open journal for upcoming scholars. The JCIS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis. The JCIS is a publication of Nova Works, a scholarly depository at Nova Southeastern University. A link to the journal is in our description. We'd also like to thank our podcast partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, who is our editing partner, and Podkite, who does all of our analytics. We'd also like to thank iHeartRadio, where people get their music and podcasts, Apple iTunes, the largest source for music and podcasts on the internet, Spotify, the most popular source for the Nova Society. The Nova Society is available on all these and other quality platforms mentioned in our description. We'd also like to thank our listeners. Without you, the Nova Society would not be possible. If you have a comment, a question, or would like to be a guest on the Nova Society, we can be reached at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. Always remember, the power of society is knowledge. So for Dr. Scott Gershwer, Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Priscilla Hobbs, and all of us here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Be well, and we hope to see you again next time.